Globalization and Work, an Introduction. Globalization speaks to the interconnectedness of our current world. The term globalization, coined decades ago by Theodore Levitt, a Harvard Business School marketing professor, refers to the ease and speed with which financial transactions can occur worldwide. It is important to understand the basis for a globalized economy and the ideology on which that economy is based. How did the world become so interconnected, and what was the catalyst for this phenomena to occur? Globalization, with its volatile mix of economic opportunity and social disruption, is redefining the boundaries for the firm, changing the dynamics among consumers, global corporations, and their suppliers, and shaping the working conditions of the millions of individuals employed in today's global supply chains. The advent of the internet, with all that is so familiar to us, began the march toward a more interconnected world. Built for military purposes in the 50s, the internet is now the primary way many of us receive our news, make purchases, and engage with others. The ability of humans to connect emotionally, politically, and socially with other humans across continents has drastically changed our world and affected the way work, working, and workers function. New ways of engaging with work have shifted the focus, location, speed, and agility of workers across the globe. We currently talk about those workers and the work that they do in the terms of the global north and the global south. These terms do not necessarily refer to geographic locations, but rather have replaced older terms such as developed, developing, and underdeveloped countries in referring to a nation's economic status. Countries are generally divided into three tiers: those developed countries with a strong gross domestic product and stable economy, such as the US, Canada, Germany, and Great Britain; those in the second tier with fewer resources and below average wages, such as Mexico and China; and those in the bottom tier, such as Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. These wage tiers are important in understanding the ability and speed with which jobs and labor can be transferred to other countries which pay lower wages. So globalization has some very real consequences for workers worldwide who find themselves unemployed because their jobs have been shipped from the global north to the global south. Globalization involves the widening of interconnectedness through global supply chains, which link thousands of firms, large and small, across multiple cultural and political boundaries. Apparel, electronics, footwear, food and toys, and so on, has provided developing countries with much needed investment, employment, technology, and access to international markets. Globalization deepens the interconnectedness because local activities are affected by global activities. For instance, the availability of food in a local market is affected by the ability of the market's owners to access, purchase, and resell food from agribusiness. This affects the prices local consumers must pay for food, which has an impact on their ability to purchase other necessary goods and services. Interconnectedness is also molded by the speed with which events take place in one part of the world, because those events affect people in another part of the world. Take, for instance, the Arab Spring, an eruption of discontent concerning austerity by populations in various Middle East countries, made more available for consumption to the world through the use of social media, which was made possible by internet-connected mobile devices made by labor in the global south. Capital mobility, or the ease and seamless movement of currency from one country to another, has huge implications for labor. We talk about this as a globalization process. The first is the internationalization of finance. which means financial markets worldwide are integrated in order to add or subtract investment monies infused into economies with the intention of making profits. Recent recessions in many countries have necessitated austerity measures be initiated in the global south in order for underdeveloped or developing countries to pay back loans from global north investors. These infusions of cash in the form of structural adjustment policies often mean poorer countries who so desperately need cash in order to provide for their citizens must choose between taking care of their populations or paying back these loans with interest. As manufacturing economies move toward service economies, there is a shift toward financial speculation and stock market manipulation to produce wealth, which means firms and owners of production squeeze from labor excess value in order to produce short-term gains. This satisfies investor demands, but harms labor, which undermines workers' wages, workers' conditions, and job security. Comparative advantage is another important concept in globalization. Comparative advantage is an idea birthed by David Ricardo in 1817, means there is a lower opportunity cost for one country to produce one unit of a good or a service than for another country to produce the same good or service. For example, the U.S. could produce one widget for $1 and one dingle, I made up that name, I don't think there really is anything called a dingle, for $2, while China can produce the same widget for 50 cents and one dingle for 75 cents. It might appear that it would be advantageous for China to produce both widgets and dingles, and that would be called absolute advantage. But we must take into account which country has the greatest opportunity cost in the production of these goods. Opportunity cost is the value of the best foregone alternative in making any choice and takes into account the factors of production, land, labor, and capital in determining which product to produce and export. Let's say the U.S. has more skilled and educated workers, a well-oiled supply chain, and better access to technology than does China in the production of dingles. So the U.S. has a less foregone opportunity cost than does China in the production of dingles. Therefore, it is advantageous for the U.S. to produce dingles and for China to produce widgets. The importance of comparative advantage is for each country to produce the goods and services with the most efficiency, one of the tenets of free trade. Foreign direct investment of governments and multinational corporations primarily occurs between global north countries, but the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008, after that time period, some federal direct investment has gone to the global south, particularly in Africa. Multinational corporations have great power in the globalized economy. The diffusion of supplier products made worldwide, which must come together to produce some salable good, is an integral feature of global supply chains. The investment of multinational corporations do generate economic growth in the global south by providing jobs, and they have lifted some out of poverty while giving consumers in the global north more choices in the marketplace. But in order for the global south to attract these large multinational corporations, they must often push their social and environmental concerns to the back burner in order to satisfy the growing demands for product. This facilitates lowering wages for workers who often work in squalid conditions with no concern for their health or safety. Labor migration is exacerbated because of capital mobility. The global north hires care and domestic workers from the global south, who often find themselves in a new country in which they don't speak the language and have few worker protections. Immigrant migration to find work in agricultural, construction, and manufacturing industries is often restricted in the global north, so the lives of undocumented immigrants are filled with low pay, poor housing, and legal insecurities. Globalization is also viewed as a project. It is a project of neoliberalism which benefits multinational corporations. Neoliberalism is a neoclassical economic theory which says the well-being of an individual lies in his or her ability to engage in competitive and entrepreneurial activities within a free market capitalistic economic system characterized by property rights. Neoliberalism operates on four principles. Privatization of all firms is in the best interest of the citizenry. Neoliberalists see property rights as the foundation to free enterprise because those who own property have a vested interest in the well-being and welfare of the population. Deregulation allows firms to quickly make production decisions without government interference. Neoliberalists see government intervention as an intrusion on the rights of owners of production to make decisions about their investments. Deunionization gives to owners of production power over workers' rights and gives them a clear path to ultimate decision-making about their resources and investments. Dehumanization for neoliberalists divorces the humanity or well-being of labor or workers from the equations of production. Human capital is merely seen as another input in the production process. Over the course of the last 8 decades, we have witnessed the results of neoliberalism on steroids in the form of the Great Depression in 1930 and the Great Recession in 2007 and 8. When government regulations are voided, workers' rights dismissed, all firms privatized, and labor rights squelched, we see increased poverty rates, high incidences of bankruptcies, and greater wealth inequality. Globalization can also be viewed as a practice. Lest we think all is lost in a globalized world, there could be some light at the end of the tunnel. Some globalization is not going away anytime in the near future, so let's look at how globalization can be mediated through social actors. Workers are not without some power to affect their work environments and often challenge the dominant interests of owners of production. Workers, in greater or lesser numbers, respond to their immediate work and life situations based on their lived identities and experiences. For instance, workers in Chinese factories mobilize to protest against intrusions in their work lives, which result in wage theft, excessive work hours, and invasive surveillance. Workers, individually and collectively, can affect broader social, economic, and political policies through mobilization and organization. Globalization can now be characterized as an economic struggle for power between dominant interests in the form of owners of production and multinational corporations, or capital, and workers, or labor. This dichotomy, under the umbrella of a neoliberal economic system of capitalism, seeks to extract from labor excess value in order to satisfy shareholders with short-term profits. As workers worldwide seek balance in the economic power relationship between labor and management, the challenge of cross-border capital mobility, deregulation, decentralized pay bargaining, and weakened trade unions often seem monumental. It is necessary for workers to band together in solidarity and continually work to rectify this power imbalance brought about by a global economy.